our intro? Do you want me to intro?
Can we just get started? All right. Excuse me. Sorry, nice to meet you, everyone. So my name is Paul, and this is David, and we went to Nepal, like 80% of everyone here. So we're Gen 2 physiotherapy students, and we did our 4-week placement in Chitwan, which is about a 7-hour bus ride southwest of Kathmandu. It's just a nice little picture. Jealous. So we started, we're going to split this up into 3 parts: key issues, experiences, and finally just finishing off the lessons that we learned on our trip. So some key issues, David?
So I think what everyone experienced here was a bit of the cultural difference, and I think from landing in the country, we all experienced that bit of a cultural difference from the people itself and the space. I think one thing we noticed was there's no sense of ownership in Nepal. So yours is kind of theirs. Like we noticed our trekking guide, for example, would just sit on some random person's bike and be like, "This is a nice bike," and then the guy would come out and just look at him and be like, "That's fine." So there was a lot of that kind of a cultural difference, but there was also in most other places, developing countries, a lot of people speak English. It's a very common language. But in Nepal, where we were in Chitwan, there wasn't that, not everyone knew English, but the ones that did know English knew a lot of it. So they were very competent in their English, whereas the rest would speak marginal, if not nothing pretty much. And apart from that, I think one thing that affected us being physios is the cultural difference in the role of a physio. So we found that in Nepal, physio isn't really regarded very highly. They don't fully understand it. The physios there are trained really well and they know what they're doing, but in terms of rehabilitation, they don't actually understand the concept of what a physio does there. So that for us was a bit of a culture shock, I kind of guess. But we found that they didn't fully understand our role. They were constantly asking us, like, "Why are you doing that? What's that going to do for the future?" Where for us, learning, and especially in Australian society, we know the role of a physio quite well. And that's also seen in the whole team and allied health perspective. In Nepal, there's no team collaboration in the hospital we're working at. You know, the doctors had their role, the physio had their role, the nurse had their role. There was no communication between each other and saying like, "Oh, this patient's doing like this, how can we all work together to make it better?" It was very much just like, "You do your thing, we'll do our thing." So we found that a bit of a difficult thing to go through. So that's a bit of the differences. I guess there's a lot more. Another thing was the hospital procedure and patient management. This kind of ties into cultural differences as well. But we found that there was no manual handling, there's no infection control, there's no hand hygiene, all that stuff we try to bring to them, but for them it was more, we're trying to save water and electricity. So for them, this type of stuff was counterproductive to how the country works, being of lack of facilities and everything. And the rehab protocol we worked in a spinal cord injury centre. They have people on bed rest for almost a year, and they develop heaps of secondary complications. So for us, just that management side of things wasn't so much towards what we thought we'd be expecting. But regardless, it was still a really good experience there. And in addition to that, it was also the use of modalities, so like your TENS, ultrasound, and traction. We use that as an adjunct therapy as physios here. We do our main therapy, like increasing range and function, all that, and then all that ultrasound and TENS is something we just do additionally, like to finish off something, where they use that as their primary treatment, which is not really what we do here in Australia at all, so we found that quite different.
So I'll split this part up into equipment and electricity. So just starting off with equipment. As you can see in that picture up there, that's the picture of the gym at the CSIC. And it's very minimal, very basic, and which was not unexpected of us. So as you can see, there's one rollator frame for one patient. You've got a traction machine, one ultrasound, one patient machine. So everything was very old and very basic. But what was actually surprising was that most of this equipment from the gym was actually donated to them by other individuals and other organizations. And that just shows how much this clinic actually struggles to provide the appropriate services that it needs for its patients. So the second thing I want to talk about is electricity, which is a big issue in Nepal, right? Everyone knows that? Yep. So it's more so a big issue in Kathmandu than it is in Chitwan, but regardless, you get sometimes where you get no electricity at all, so maybe about 3 hours, 2 hours if you're lucky. And occasionally you just get a full-day blackout. And as a result, like David mentioned before, a lot of their treatment is based off of those EPA modalities. And because there's no electricity, they can't use those equipment, so pretty much the clinic just shuts down for the whole day, and no one actually does anything.
Drink tea and coffee.
Yeah, and just sit around and talk. The last part I want to talk about is autonomy. So at CSIC, we had complete autonomy over all the treatments we did, all our patients. I mean, everything. I think that's because we're from a country like Australia. So we immediately, when we told them that we've got this high international status, and they regarded us quite highly. But despite that, we'd always run through our treatment plans with the head physio. We'd tell them what we'd do on the day and what we might expect. And then the physio would always say, sounds good, go ahead, go ahead. That could mean one of two things. Either we were great physios, we knew what we were doing, or the second thing, they just had complete trust in us. So I guess what's important to remember was that because we're from Australia, and we've got this high international status, we have to be extra careful with what we do and what we say, because we don't want them to believe the wrong things. So in experiences, we split this up into volunteer experience, which is from a Monday to a Friday, weekend trips away, and some independent traveling at the end of the 4-week placement. So I just want to talk about the Chitwan Projects Abroad team, which is that little community there. So we were a very close-knit community. That's because everyone lived really, really close to each other. The max zone lived away was about 1 kilometre away. So as a result, we always walked to work together, and we just come back together on tuk-tuks, which was always fun. Every Wednesday afternoon, we'd have meetings where everyone would just come together, drink some tea, and we talk about the plans for the rest of the week and any plans that we might have on the weekend. Every second Thursday, we have quiz night, and every Friday night, all the volunteers would come together and we'd go and teach some local children English. That was always fun. David?
Yeah, my team always won quiz night, and just pointing that out very clearly. A big thing was we had dual experiences at Chitwan Medical Teaching College and the Chitwan Spinal Injury Clinic. And so CMC was a teaching college, and that place was quite modern, quite new. And we found our use there wasn't very high. We were just like birds in a fence. We just sat there and did nothing. Whereas the Spinal Centre really is a really hands-on place. It's spinal cord injury, it's very heavy patient loads. So we thought that both of us being there could be most beneficial to the clinic. And it really was. I mean, we started there, and there were some experienced physios from London. There was a lady from London there, and she taught us and brought us in, handed over all the things that were happening. And we worked with her for the first week and got a really good insight to spinal cord injuries, because both of us have never actually learned anything about spinal cord injuries yet at uni. And it was a really hands-on learning experience, which was always guided by her at the start. When she left, you know, we had the available resources in some respect to continue on treating. In addition to that, we also had the opportunity to work with what we call the 2-week specials. And they were high school students, primarily from Australia, and there was a few from America. But they came on like an exchange program, like what we were doing, but they were pretty much not independent. So they always went as a group. And so we had 2 or 3 of them per day for 2 to 3 hours. And we just had to like supervise them and show them around, which I found quite difficult because I didn't want to keep introducing the same patient to a different group of students every day, which is quite full on for them. They have a pretty tough time as it is. But we ended up kind of just doing a little educational session with the kids. It was more just saying, oh, what are you doing? What do you want to do? Do you want to become a doctor? Most of them want to become doctors, but we shed some light on physios, and I think we persuaded a few to like not just go towards that medical side, but to see a different side of health and the other options that are available. But it was a really nice, challenging experience because I got the chance to like deal with people that were kind of like every direction, kind of didn't all have the same scope. We're all doing physio, we're doing a bit of everything, and they all kind of were at different ages as well. It was a really nice learning and teaching experience. I think that gave me a lot of appreciation for teachers and how hard it is to keep a bunch of little girls just quiet and settled and focus on one thing. And weekend trips, every week, plenty of time to go travel somewhere. We went to some pretty amazing places, and like the Lonely Planet just doesn't do it justice. Once you get there, you learn about, from word of mouth, so many different places you can go, which is just absolutely amazing. Independent travel as well. We took some time off after our placement, and I think the best thing about the subject is that, you know, you are doing a subject, and you do have some assessments to do, but you can extend your trip as long as you want, and it's pretty much just an extra holiday. For lessons. Oh, okay, so every day, because Paul and I were together, we had curfews, no electricity, or no internet at home, so we ended up having to just talk to each other. We had a lot of time to just reflect and talk about things. I would come home with a rant about how I struggled to understand our supervisor's approach to health, and Paul would try and shed some light and be like, oh, look, you got to understand they're from this country and you're doing this, things are different, and just that kind of taking a look at yourself from someone else. Like, he would look at what I was saying and give me an input, and I'd look at what he was saying and give him an input, rather than just me having a rant, bang, I'm right, that's my rant, and period. So Paul would jump in and have some things to say, which kind of like let me take a step back every now and then and kind of look at our supervisor and see what approach he was coming from and why he was doing that. No, I think that was really good. I think the fact that you have so much time to actually talk to each other a bit more, rather than just going home, being on the computer, or going out doing all things like that.
It's also great because we carried around this little notebook, so every time we saw something interesting, let's do that. We just write it down, and then we just ask each other about that at the end of the day. And we also have those notebooks just for like language, so it's a new word that we learn every day. We just write it down. It was always fun.
Yeah, and also, yeah, the cultural sensitivity bit, I think we all took a lesson away from that, learning how to like respect other people's, how they are, like the personal space issue. We found that hard at the start because it was very like, this is mine, and then I think we learnt at the time, they were also quite sensitive towards us, so the shoes off at the front door, they didn't tell us till the 3rd week in. Yeah. I thought from a hospital perspective, like, I'm wearing shoes around here, I'm not walking barefoot. There's sharps problems, there's hygiene problems, but for them it was more of a culture thing, so that was something we had to adapt to.
In terms of cultural sensitivity, I think 2 or 3 days when we were just still traveling from Kathmandu to Chitwan, I remember sitting in a tourist bus. Yeah, we were sitting in a tourist bus, and then we had all these people coming in and off, and they're just bumping into you, not apologizing, not saying anything, ignoring you, and I was like, that is... And then it wasn't until later when we arrived in Chitwan when Julia, the person in charge of projects abroad, she told us about a lack of personal space. There's no such thing as personal space. So once I understood that, I'm like, oh, sense now. So on our trip to Bandipo, I was sitting in the back with David, and I just had this random guy resting his head on my shoulder. Okay, I don't want to wake you up. So you tend to just take a step back and appreciate it a lot more, which I should have done from the start, I think. That's what I've learned.
And I learned how to say no. I got asked several times to do the initial assessment, to do the documentation, and like, I didn't want to write anything because it's a legal thing, and we learned that as well, and more of I don't want to be responsible for doing an initial on anyone. So I definitely learned to say no there. As much as a good opportunity was going to be, I had to say no as much as I wanted to. So that was there, and I think the most important bit was just making use of what you do have and not looking at what you don't. So many of the times we'd criticise the way things were done, and we'd criticise the lack of facilities, but then we would get nowhere, and it was more of trying to appreciate what you did have and trying to maximise that potential. And I think that's what made the trip so much better, is like we just forgot about everything else and just looked at what was in front of us and go, we got this, what are we going to do with it? I think that was the best bit of it, made the trip well.
Question time.
I wouldn't say we scrapped what we learned. If anything, we kind of showed, I always proposed the idea to our supervisor of how we'd do it in Australia, and he would either just agree with me or be like, but that's not possible here. So it was hard in that respect because we knew what we should do, but we didn't want to change their approach because once we leave, if they're not going to follow it, there's kind of no point. We've got to work with what they're doing. Yeah, I don't know, like, I found we brought a lot to the clinic. Like, we try to enforce a lot more hands-on therapy, and by the end, the supervisor was doing a bit more hands-on therapy with his clients as opposed to just the TENS, traction and ultrasound. It was difficult. Oh, it wasn't so much an issue, just I didn't want to be just observing.
So we really had a taste of Chitwan, Spinal, a lot more hands-on. We felt like we could apply ourselves a lot more rather than... At CMC, I think all I did was...
It's a bit more because it's more chronic patients at the spinal cord. And if you're there for a time, it's a bit more rewarding because you get to see, if you do see progress, you get to see it. Whereas at CMC, it's more of an outpatient department. And they come in, they don't come in. You might see them again, you might not. And it's kind of like if they do come in and it's an initial, you're probably not going to see them again as well. So it's a good place to go if you're already a qualified physio and they let you have that autonomy. But as a student, I probably wouldn't recommend